The wrong door can change your life faster than the right one ever could. The rain hit the pavement so hard it sounded like thousands of tiny warnings crashing against the streets of Chicago. My shift ended at exactly 1:17 in the morning. I remember because I looked at the clock above the espresso machine 3 times before locking the front door of the café. The place smelled like coffee beans and vanilla syrup, the same way it always did after closing. Normally, I loved those final quiet moments. That night they made me nervous. I slipped my apron into my bag, pulled on my jacket, and stepped outside into the storm. Cold rain immediately soaked through my sleeves. The street was almost empty except for a few passing cars, and the glow of traffic lights reflecting off wet pavement. I lowered my head and started walking toward the employee parking lot. Then I saw it. A silver sedan parked across the street. My stomach dropped so fast it felt like missing a step on a staircase. Even through the rain, I recognized the car instantly. I froze beneath the cafe awning. Maybe I was wrong. Maybe it belonged to someone else. Then the driver's door opened. My pulse exploded. There are moments when fear does not arrive gradually. It arrives all at once. 1 second you are thinking clearly. The next instinct takes over. I turned and walked in the opposite direction. Fast at first. Then faster. I did not look back. I did not want to know whether he had seen me. Rain stung my face as I crossed the street and hurried toward a nearby hotel parking structure. My shoes slipped slightly against the wet concrete as I ran inside. Rows of expensive vehicles filled the lower level. My breathing became shallow. I could hear my heartbeat louder than the storm. Somewhere behind me a car door slammed. Panic made the decision for me. Near the elevator entrance sat a black SUV unlike anything else in the garage. The vehicle looked expensive enough to cost more than every apartment I had ever rented combined. Its rear passenger door was slightly open. I never stopped to think about why. I never asked myself who it belonged to. I only knew I needed somewhere to hide. I slipped inside and quietly pulled the door shut. Darkness surrounded me. The leather seats smelled new. Rain tapped softly against the windows. My chest rose and fell as I fought to stay silent. Every second felt like a minute. I crouched low behind the front seats and listened. Footsteps echoed somewhere across the garage. Then silence. Maybe he had not followed me. Maybe I was safe. For the first time in several minutes, I allowed myself to breathe. That was when the elevator doors opened. Several pairs of footsteps approached the SUV. Slow, confident, deliberate. My entire body went rigid. A second later, the driver's door opened. Voices. Male. Calm. Professional. Then another door opened. Someone entered the rear passenger seat directly across from me. The interior light briefly illuminated the cabin. I looked up, and for the first time that night, I realized escaping one problem might have placed me inside something far more dangerous. The interior light disappeared as quickly as it had appeared, leaving the cabin wrapped in shadows again. I stayed perfectly still. Every muscle in my body locked in place. My heart pounded so hard I was convinced everyone inside the vehicle could hear it. The man sitting across from me did not speak immediately. Neither did the driver. The rain continued tapping against the roof while the engine came to life with a quiet hum. Then the SUV began moving. That was the moment panic truly arrived. I was no longer hiding in a parked vehicle. I was trapped inside a moving one. I considered opening the door. I considered screaming. I considered a dozen terrible ideas that all ended the same way. None of them seemed smart. The city lights slid across the tinted windows as we left the parking garage and entered the streets of Chicago. Finally, a calm voice broke the silence. You have approximately 10 seconds to explain why you are in my car. The voice was deep, controlled, not angry. Somehow that made it more intimidating. Slowly, I lifted my head above the seat. The man watching me looked exactly like someone who never needed to raise his voice. Dark suit, dark hair, sharp features, completely composed. His attention felt unnervingly focused. I am sorry, I blurted out immediately. I know this looks bad. It does. I was not trying to steal anything. That is good. The driver remained silent. A second man sat in the front passenger seat, equally silent. Neither seemed surprised by the situation, which somehow made me feel even more nervous. Please stop the car, I said. I can get out. The man studied me for a moment. Can you? I frowned. What does that mean? Instead of answering, he glanced toward the rear window. Instinctively, I followed his gaze. Headlights appeared several car lengths behind us. My stomach tightened. Even through the rain, I recognized the silver sedan. The same one I had seen outside the café. My hands immediately started shaking. The reaction must have been obvious because the man across from me noticed it instantly. Interesting, he said quietly. Who is that? Nobody. The lie came too fast. Nobody does not usually make people look terrified. I looked away. The city blurred past outside. Neon signs reflected across rain-covered glass. For several seconds nobody spoke. Then the man leaned back slightly. You climbed into a stranger's vehicle during a storm. You were hiding on the floor. Now you are visibly frightened by the car behind us. His expression never changed. Either you have made a series of very unusual decisions tonight, or someone was chasing you. My throat felt tight. I was not being chased. Another lie. The certainty in his voice startled me. Not because he sounded cruel, because he sounded correct. The SUV continued through downtown traffic while silence filled the cabin again. Finally, the man in the front passenger seat spoke for the first time. Sir. He nodded slightly toward his phone. The man across from me glanced at the screen and sighed. Of course. Then his eyes returned to me. Miss, I strongly suggest you tell the truth before this becomes more complicated. I swallowed hard. Why do you care? For the first time, something almost resembling amusement appeared in his eyes. Because you are sitting in my SUV. Then the driver turned onto a brightly lit avenue, and the front passenger quietly said the name that made my blood run cold. Mr. Romano, we are clear behind us. Mr. Romano. The name hit me harder than the storm outside. Every major newspaper in Chicago had mentioned it at some point. Business magazines praised him. Local television stations spoke about his investments. Online rumors spoke about everything else. Dante Romano was one of those men whose reputation entered a room before he did. And somehow, through a combination of panic and terrible decision-making, I was sitting in his SUV. For several seconds nobody spoke. The rain continued falling against the windows while the city drifted past outside. I stared at Dante. Dante stared back. Neither of us seemed particularly happy about the situation. You know who I am, he said finally. It was not a question. Yes. My voice sounded much smaller than I wanted. He nodded once. Good. Then let us try honesty. I looked down at my hands. They were still trembling. I was leaving work. The café. Yes. And the simple question felt impossible to answer. Not because I did not know the truth. Because I was tired of explaining it. Tired of defending it. Tired of hearing people tell me I was overreacting. I saw someone, I said quietly. Someone you know. Yes. Dante studied me carefully. The SUV stopped at a red light. Bright neon signs reflected across the dark interior. And seeing this person caused you to hide inside a stranger's vehicle. I closed my eyes. When he said it out loud, it sounded ridiculous. I know how that sounds. I am more interested in why it happened. The answer sat heavily in my chest. Outside, the silver sedan was no longer visible. Yet my body still felt trapped in survival mode. He does not understand boundaries, I admitted. Your former boyfriend. My eyes opened. How did you know? For the first time, Dante looked almost amused. Because people rarely hide from healthy relationships. I wanted to argue. Instead, I stared out the window. The city lights blurred through sheets of rain. Somewhere deep down I knew he was right. The problem was that acknowledging it made everything feel real. You do not have to tell me everything tonight, Dante said unexpectedly. Then why ask? Because. Fear leaves patterns. I frowned. Patterns. People who are merely annoyed do not crawl into unfamiliar SUVs. His tone remained calm. Matter of fact. People who feel unsafe do. The words settled heavily inside the cabin. Neither of the men in front spoke. The driver focused on the road. The passenger checked messages on his phone. Yet somehow it felt as though the entire vehicle had gone silent. Dante leaned back slightly. What is your name? Megan. Megan Parker. My stomach tightened. How do you know my last name? The cafe has employee schedules posted near the register. That answer should have felt alarming. Instead, it felt strangely reassuring. He noticed details. That explained a lot. You remember things. Important things. The SUV turned onto a quieter street lined with luxury buildings. I recognized the neighborhood immediately. People like me did not live there. People like Dante did. My anxiety returned. Where are we going? Somewhere dry. I should go home. Should you? His gaze met mine again. Or are you worried someone might be waiting there? The question landed with uncomfortable accuracy. I looked away. The silence that followed told him everything my words had not. And for the first time that night, I realized Dante Romano was no longer trying to figure out whether I was hiding something. He was trying to figure out how much danger I was actually in. The SUV slowed beneath the covered entrance of a residential tower so elegant, it looked more like a luxury hotel than an apartment building. Rain cascaded from the edges of the canopy in silver sheets, while uniformed staff stood beneath warm lights near the entrance. Everything about the place felt expensive. Quiet. Controlled. The exact opposite of how I felt. The vehicle came to a stop. For a moment nobody moved. Then the driver stepped out and opened Dante's door. The front passenger exited next. I remained frozen in my seat. Dante glanced toward me. You can stay in the car if you want. I blinked. What? You look like someone expecting a trap. Heat rushed to my face because he was not wrong. I barely know you. That is probably a healthy instinct. The corner of his mouth moved slightly. Not quite a smile. Come inside anyway. It is warmer than the parking garage. Before I could answer, he stepped out into the night. Through the window, I watched him exchange a few words with the building staff. Everyone seemed to straighten the moment they saw him. Not dramatically, just enough to notice. Respect followed him the way shadows followed light. Eventually, I climbed out of the SUV. Cold rain immediately found the few inches of exposed skin between my jacket and collar. I hurried beneath the canopy. The lobby beyond the glass doors looked like something from a magazine. Marble floors. Soft golden lighting. Fresh flowers arranged on polished tables. I suddenly became very aware of my damp sneakers and inexpensive coat. The elevator ride to the penthouse lasted less than a minute. Felt much longer. Nobody spoke. My reflection stared back at me from mirrored walls. Wet hair. Tired eyes. Anxiety I could not hide. When the elevator doors finally opened, I stepped into a space larger than my entire apartment. Floor-to-ceiling windows revealed the storm-covered skyline. Warm lights reflected off dark hardwood floors. A fireplace glowed quietly in the distance. The place was beautiful. It was also intimidating. Seat. Dante gestured toward a sofa. You sound very confident that I will listen. Most exhausted people do. I hated that he was right again. A few minutes later, a house manager appeared carrying a folded blanket, a dry towel, and a steaming mug. She offered them with a kind smile before disappearing again. No questions. No curiosity. No judgment. Just kindness. I wrapped the blanket around my shoulders and stared at the tea. You do this often? I asked. Dante looked up from his phone. Do what? Bring random strangers home during thunderstorms. This time he actually smiled. Briefly. No good. You are the first. Somehow that answer did not make me feel better. The silence that followed felt less uncomfortable than before. Outside, lightning illuminated the skyline for a brief second before fading again. I sipped the tea and realized it was the first warm thing I had touched all night. My shoulders relaxed. Slightly. Then my phone vibrated. The sound instantly erased every bit of comfort I had managed to find. One message. Then another. Then another. The screen lit up repeatedly on the coffee table. I did not need to read them to know who sent them. My stomach tightened anyway. Across the room, Dante noticed the change immediately. He did not ask to see the phone. He did not move closer. He simply watched as each notification appeared. The room remained silent except for the storm outside. Finally, after the seventh message arrived in less than 2 minutes, Dante set his phone down and looked directly at me. Megan, he said calmly. How long has this been happening? The question lingered in the air between us while rain continued sliding down the penthouse windows. How long has this been happening? Sounded simple. It was not. I stared at my phone as another notification illuminated the screen. Then another. Then another. Each vibration tightened something inside my chest. For a long time I had measured my days by those notifications. They told me where I should be, who I should talk to, why I was wrong, why I was selfish, why I needed to explain myself. Eventually, constant pressure starts sounding normal. That was the frightening part. You stop noticing how heavy it has become. I wrapped both hands around the warm mug of tea and looked toward the skyline. Chicago shimmered beneath the storm like another world entirely. About a year, I said quietly. Dante did not react immediately. A year. I nodded. Saying it out loud made the number sound impossible. It was not always like this. My voice felt distant even to me. At first he was attentive, then protective, then concerned. I laughed softly without humor. Then somehow I needed permission for everything. Dante remained silent. The silence did not feel empty. It felt intentional, like he was allowing me space to hear my own thoughts. I changed my work schedule once without telling him, I continued. He called 7 times in 20 minutes. My eyes dropped toward the glowing phone. Back then I thought it meant he cared. Lightning flashed outside. The room brightened for a second before darkness returned. And now? Dante asked. I swallowed hard. Now I know it was about control. The word felt uncomfortable, real, honest. Another notification appeared. This time Dante's eyes briefly shifted toward the screen. He still did not ask to read the messages. Somehow that restraint made me trust him more. Most people wanted proof before offering understanding. He seemed more interested in understanding first. Why did you stay? The question could have sounded judgmental from someone else. From him it sounded genuine. I thought about that for a long moment. Because leaving felt harder. The answer surprised even me. Every time I tried, he convinced me I was overreacting, that nobody else would understand, that I was imagining things. I laughed again, quieter this time. After a while, I stopped trusting my own instincts. Dante leaned back slightly. His expression remained unreadable. That is usually how these situations work. The certainty in his voice caught my attention. You sound like you have seen this before. I have seen people lose confidence in themselves. His gaze moved toward the rain-covered city. It rarely happens overnight. The room fell silent again. Somewhere in the distance, thunder rolled across the skyline. My shoulders felt strangely lighter than they had hours earlier. Not because anything was solved. Nothing was solved. But for the first time, someone had listened without interrupting. Without minimizing. Without explaining my own life back to me. My phone vibrated once more. I reached for it automatically, then stopped. The screen continued glowing on the table. I did not pick it up. Across the room, Dante noticed. He said nothing. Yet something in his expression changed. Respect, perhaps. Or recognition. Finally, after months of reacting, apologizing, and explaining, I had ignored it. It was a tiny decision. Barely noticeable. Yet it felt like the first choice that truly belonged to me. And for the first time since climbing into that SUV, I began to suspect that maybe the safest place I had found all year was not a hiding spot at all. Morning arrived quietly. The storm had moved on during the night, leaving Chicago wrapped in pale sunlight and streets that still glistened from the rain. I woke up on a sofa I did not remember falling asleep on. For a few seconds I stared at the ceiling and felt disoriented. Then everything came rushing back. The café. The parking garage. The SUV. Dante Romano. My phone. The messages. I sat up slowly and pulled the blanket tighter around my shoulders. The penthouse was silent. Floor-to-ceiling windows filled the room with soft golden light. The city stretched endlessly beyond the glass. For the first time in months, I realized I had slept through an entire night without waking up to check my phone. The realization felt strange. Almost unreal. A fresh cup of coffee sat on the kitchen counter beside a folded note. I walked over and picked it up. The handwriting was neat and direct. Make yourself comfortable. Breakfast is in the refrigerator. I will return this afternoon.
DR.
I stared at the note longer than necessary. Nobody had ever left me instructions that were not actually demands disguised as suggestions. The difference felt surprisingly significant. I poured coffee into a mug and wandered toward the windows. Below, the city was alive with movement. Cars filled the streets. Pedestrians hurried along sidewalks. Somewhere down there, normal life continued. My phone vibrated on the counter. The sound immediately tightened my chest. For a moment, I simply stared at it. Then I picked it up. 14 unread messages. 3 missed calls. My stomach sank. The messages themselves were not threatening. That was never the problem. They were questions. Demands for explanations. Requests disguised as obligations. Why did you leave? Where are you? Why are you ignoring me? Call me now. The familiar pressure returned instantly. I could almost feel the weight of it settling onto my shoulders again. Before I could overthink it, another call appeared on the screen. My finger hovered above the answer button, then stopped. A memory surfaced. Sitting in the penthouse the night before. Ignoring the phone for the first time. Choosing silence. Choosing myself. Slowly I pressed decline. The world did not end. Nobody appeared at the door. The ceiling did not collapse. The simple act left me shaking anyway. Around noon, the penthouse elevator opened and Dante stepped inside. He had changed from his dark suit into another equally expensive dark suit, which somehow seemed impossible. He carried a leather folder beneath one arm and looked as composed as ever. "Good afternoon," he said. "You own colors other than black, right?" The question escaped before I could stop it. To my surprise, Dante laughed. A genuine laugh. Brief but unmistakable. Rarely. I smiled despite myself. The moment felt normal. Comfortable. Then he noticed my expression change. What happened? I handed him the phone. Dante scanned the screen for several seconds before returning it. "How many times a day?" "Depends. Average." I sighed. 20. 30. Sometimes more. His jaw tightened slightly. Not in anger. In concern. "Megan." He sat across from me. "This is not sustainable." I looked down at my hands. "I know. Do you want it to stop?" The question sounded simple. Yet it felt bigger than anything else. Because wanting it to stop meant admitting I could no longer fix it alone. I stared out at the skyline and finally whispered the truth I had been avoiding for months. "Yes." Dante nodded once. Calm. Certain. As if he had been waiting for that answer all along. "Good," he said. "Then let us start solving the actual problem." The next few hours felt strangely calm. Not because my problems had disappeared. They had not. They were still waiting for me the moment I looked at my phone. The difference was that for the first time I was not facing them alone. Dante spent most of the afternoon working from his office at the far end of the penthouse. Through the open glass walls, I could occasionally see him on calls, reviewing documents or speaking with people whose names I did not know. Everything about him seemed efficient. Deliberate. The kind of person who solved problems by moving toward them instead of around them. I admired that more than I wanted to admit. Around 4 o'clock, one of his assistants arrived carrying several folders. They spoke quietly in the office for nearly 20 minutes before she left again. I tried not to pay attention. It was not my business. Yet curiosity kept pulling my eyes toward the glass doors. Eventually, Dante emerged holding one of the folders. He sat across from me and placed it on the coffee table. "What is that?" I asked. "Information." I immediately became nervous. "About me." "About options." He opened the folder. Inside were brochures, contact information and resource lists. Counselors, legal advisors, community support organizations, workplace protection programs. Everything was organized neatly. Everything looked real. "You did this today?" I asked quietly. No, Dante shook his head. "Professionals did." I stared at the papers. For months I had convinced myself there were no solutions. Seeing actual resources sitting in front of me felt almost overwhelming. I would not even know where to start. Then start with one conversation. His answer sounded simple. Maybe that was because it was. My phone vibrated again. We both glanced toward it. Another message. Then another. Then another. Dante's expression never changed. How often does he contact your workplace? My stomach tightened. Too often. Your manager knows? Some of it. I looked down. Not everything. Dante nodded slowly as though confirming something he already suspected. And your friends? I laughed softly. Most of them stopped asking questions months ago. Saying it out loud hurt more than I expected. Isolation had arrived so gradually that I barely noticed it happening. One canceled dinner. One missed phone call. One explanation after another. Until eventually there was nobody left to explain things to. Silence settled over the room. The city skyline glowed beyond the windows as afternoon slowly shifted toward evening. Finally Dante spoke again. Megan. I looked up. The people who care about you are not the problem. I frowned slightly. What does that mean? It means the people who genuinely care do not benefit from your fear. The words landed harder than I expected. Because deep down I knew they were true. For a long time I had confused keeping the peace with keeping myself safe. They were not the same thing. Hours later, after dinner, I stood alone near the windows watching the lights of Chicago flicker across the horizon. My phone remained silent for the first time all day. Not because the messages had stopped. Because I had finally turned it off. The city looked different from 40 floors above the streets. Larger. More hopeful. Behind me I heard footsteps. Dante stopped beside the window but said nothing. Together we watched the skyline in comfortable silence. Then he spoke without looking away from the glass. Tomorrow you tell me everything. My heartbeat slowed. For some reason the idea no longer terrified me. Okay, I said softly. And for the first time since this began, I realized I was ready to tell the whole truth. The next morning arrived with clear skies and a strange sense of anticipation. I woke up earlier than usual, long before the city outside had fully come to life. For several minutes, I sat alone near the penthouse windows watching the first hints of sunlight spread across Chicago. The skyline looked different now. Less intimidating. More open. Maybe nothing had changed out there. Maybe I was the one changing. When Dante joined me for coffee, neither of us rushed into the conversation. That surprised me. He had told me the night before that today I would tell him everything. Yet he never pushed. Never demanded. He simply waited. Eventually, I set my cup down and started talking. The truth came out in pieces. Not dramatic confessions. Not shocking revelations. Just small moments that had accumulated over time. The first time my former boyfriend insisted on knowing where I was every hour. The first time he convinced me to cancel plans with friends because he claimed they were a bad influence. The first time I apologized for something that was not actually my fault. Looking back, each moment seemed obvious. At the time they felt normal. That was the frightening part. Control rarely arrives announcing itself. It arrives disguised as concern. It arrives one small compromise at a time. Dante listened without interrupting. Hours passed. Sunlight shifted across the floor. Several times I expected him to offer advice. He never did. He just listened. By the end, I felt emotionally exhausted but strangely lighter. Like I had finally set down something I had been carrying for too long. Thank you, Dante said quietly. I frowned. For what? For being honest. Nobody had ever thanked me for telling the truth before. The response caught me off guard. Later that afternoon, Dante introduced me to a woman named Claire. She was professional, calm, and worked with one of the support organizations listed in the folder he had shown me. The meeting took place in a private conference room inside the building. There was nothing intimidating about it. No pressure. No expectations. Claire simply explained options, resources, support systems, legal protections, practical steps. For the first time, I realized how many people dedicated their lives to helping situations like mine. The feeling was overwhelming in the best possible way. After the meeting ended, I stepped back into the hallway and found Dante waiting nearby. How did it go? He asked. I smiled. A real smile this time. Better than I expected. He nodded as if he already knew the answer. That evening something else happened. With guidance from Claire and several professionals, plans began moving forward. My workplace received information about support resources. Documentation was organized. Communication records were preserved. Everything happened through proper channels. Calmly, legally, professionally. There were no dramatic confrontations. No grand speeches. Just capable people doing their jobs. Watching the process unfold made me realize something important. For months I had believed I was trapped because I could not solve everything alone. The truth was that I was never supposed to. As night settled over the city, I returned to the windows once again. Chicago glittered beneath a sea of lights. Behind me I heard Dante's footsteps. "You look different," he said. "Different how?" "Like someone who can finally see a way forward." I stared out at the skyline and smiled softly, because for the first time in a very long time I could. And somewhere deep inside, the fear that had driven me into that SUV was finally beginning to lose its grip. 3 months later, the city looked completely different to me. Not because Chicago had changed, because I had. The morning sun reflected off glass buildings as I unlocked the front door of the café. The familiar scent of coffee beans filled the air. Customers lined up for their morning orders. Espresso machines hissed. Cups clinked against countertops. Life felt normal again. Beautifully normal. I no longer checked my phone every 5 minutes. I no longer measured my day by someone else's expectations. The support systems Claire helped me connect with had changed everything. Professional guidance, clear boundaries, and people who genuinely cared had slowly rebuilt parts of me I thought were gone forever. It had not happened overnight. Some days were difficult. Some conversations were uncomfortable. Healing rarely moves in a straight line. But it moves. That was what mattered. Around noon, one of my coworkers smiled at me while handing over a tray of drinks. "You seem happy lately." I laughed. "Is it that obvious?" "Very." She pointed toward my face. "You actually smile with your eyes now." The comment stayed with me for the rest of the afternoon. Because she was right. For a long time, every smile had felt like part of a performance. Now it felt real. When my shift finally ended, I stepped outside into bright spring sunshine. The same sidewalk where fear had once followed me now felt completely different. People walked past carrying shopping bags and coffee cups. Traffic moved steadily through downtown streets. The world continued exactly as it always had. Yet everything felt lighter. My phone remained silent in my pocket. Not because I was hiding from it. Because there was nothing left to fear. I started walking toward the train station when a familiar black SUV caught my attention across the street. For a second I stopped. The memory hit me instantly. Then, panic. A parking garage. The worst decision and the best decision of my life happening at the same time. The driver's door remained closed. The engine idled quietly. Sunlight reflected across polished black paint. Then the rear passenger door opened. Dante Romano stepped out. He looked exactly the same as the night we met. Dark suit, calm expression, quiet confidence. Yet something about him seemed different too. Maybe because now I knew the man behind the reputation. He smiled when he saw me. Not the polite smile he gave strangers. The real one. "Good afternoon, Megan. You know most people send a text first." I considered it. And the SUV seemed funnier. I laughed before I could stop myself. Several months ago, I would have been terrified standing beside that vehicle. Now it felt strangely familiar. Dante glanced toward the cafe behind me. "How was work?" "Busy." "Good busy or bad busy?" "Good busy." He nodded approvingly. "Excellent." For a moment, we simply stood there watching the city move around us. Then Dante tilted his head slightly toward the SUV. "Still afraid of black cars?" The question made me smile. I looked at the vehicle that had once been nothing more than a desperate hiding place. Then I looked back at him. Only the ones that do not lead somewhere better. For a second, neither of us spoke. The sounds of the city drifted around us. Car horns. Distant conversations. A train passing somewhere overhead. Ordinary life. Beautiful life. Dante opened the passenger door. "Would you like a ride?" I smiled and stepped forward. Not because I needed saving anymore. Not because I was afraid. But because for the first time in a very long time I was choosing where to go next. And sometimes the wrong door is only wrong until it opens into freedom.